The Wii U generation was definitely a very weird time to be a Nintendo fan. At first it seemed very promising, especially since it came after the huge success of the original Wii. But unfortunately, Nintendo really shot themselves in the foot with marketing, yada yada yada. However, despite the very poor sales of the console, it still had a very great lineup of games, with a huge majority of them eventually getting new life on the Nintendo Switch. I mean, a game like Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze, for example, did moderately well on the Wii U, but I feel like people started really appreciating it once it came out on Nintendo Switch with a much more bigger audience. And that's doubly the case for a lot of Wii U games that came over to the Switch. And while there was some arguments about Nintendo's decision of doing this, especially since they've been charging most of these $60 again, I do think this was a really good idea in the long run because now we have a very good, accessible way to play these games on modern consoles. Like now, jumping all the way to Nintendo Switch 2, you can still play through Donkey Kong Country Tropical Freeze just like you did on your original Nintendo Switch. However, out of all the very stellar Wii U titles, the one that really sticks out weirdly is Yoshi's Woolly World. As out of all the Wii U games in the library, this game in particular has yet to release on Nintendo Switch. And because of that, I feel like this game has slowly become forgotten over time, especially since, let's be real, who's actually going to be playing the Wii U in the year 2026? Which honestly is a real shame, because out of the much more modern 2D platformers from Nintendo, this is definitely one of the greater ones out there. And as for like a brief history of this game, so with Yoshi's Woolly World, this game was developed by Goodfeel, a studio that has worked with Nintendo for many years as they also developed games like Kirby's Epic Yarn, Wario Land Shake It. And most recently, they released Princess Peach Showtime, and Woolly World wasn't the only Yoshi game they worked on, as a few years ago they also worked on Crafted World. And I'm 90% sure that they're also developers of Yoshi and the Mysterious Book. So yeah, after this game, they basically just became like the Yoshi studio. But anyways, so after the release of Kirby's Epic Yarn, this game grew the attention of Takashi Tezuka, as he saw the graphics of the game and he thought the Yarn art style would fit perfectly for a brand new Yoshi game, as it was a series that was mostly known for its arts and crafts aesthetic. And on the plus side, they're going to be jumping from the Wii all the way to the Wii U. And not just that, but also this will be the very first ever Yoshi game to release on a home console since Yoshi's Story in 1997. And so just like that, Yarn Yoshi started development. Where around early 2013, Nintendo would have a huge Wii U Direct where they, well, quite literally show off everything they have for that generation. And that's not even me being hyperbolic, like, they had everything announced there, with maybe like 2 exceptions. But yeah, this was the very first time we actually saw a glimpse of what it's going to be like, and you can really tell the Epic Yarn inspiration from this teaser. However, after this announcement, this game would end up being dead silent for almost a whole year, until finally in 2014 they fully unveiled the game as Yoshi's Woolly World. And man, even though that the Wii U generation wasn't really that kind to Nintendo, I still think their E3 2014 showcase is definitely one of their best, as they had so many amazing things to showcase in this Direct alone. From more info on Super Smash Bros., a glimpse of Zelda Breath of the Wild, and even a brand new Nintendo IP with Splatoon. It definitely felt like a very promising future for Nintendo at the time, even if a majority of those games didn't really come out that year. And all I can say is that out of all the games that they showcased there, Yoshi's Woolly World was definitely my most hyped one. Like, I've always been a big fan of Yoshi, so seeing a new game on the Wii U was definitely very exciting for me. Even if, since I live in the US, I had to wait 4 freaking months when the rest of the world actually got it in June. Why did Nintendo delay it specifically in the US? I have no idea. My only guess is that they desperately wanted a holiday title for the Wii U that year. As if you look at the lineup, they had stuff like Super Mario Maker, Mario Tennis Ultra Smash, and Animal Crossing Amiibo Festival. Yeah. But with everything out of the way, let's get started. Okay, so booting up the Wii U and... man. You know, I must say, scrolling around the Wii U these days feels weirdly... empty. Like, the Wii U eShop has been gone for years now. And as I scroll through the notifications, it feels like time has completely stopped. As the only actual notification is stuff like, hey, Zelda Breath of the Wild is released on the Wii U. I'm pretty sure 90% of the people didn't play this game on the Wii U. But whatever, I'm just gonna start the game. Okay, so the story begins on Craft Island, which is the place home of the Yoshis. Everything has been very peaceful on the island until suddenly Kamek arrives as he hatches his latest plan, which is to simply mutilate the Yoshis by dismembering them piece by piece and sort them out based on the color of their bodies. But luckily, Kamek missed only 2 Yoshis, and now it's up to them to try and save their friends. Okay, so it's basically another straightforward Nintendo plot, as it mostly just boils down to just stopping Kamek. Although I must say, Kamek's plan on scattering all the Yoshis into little pieces, if it wasn't for the fact that they were made out of yarn, this would probably be an immediate T rating. And it really makes you think, do they actually feel all of this, or are they just straight up dead? But going back into topic real quick, so Craft Island is basically your hub world / world map of this game. If you're familiar with Super Mario 3D World, then it works exactly like that, as it's a 3D space where you can choose any level. Now, jumping all the way to gameplay. So, the best way to describe it is that it feels like a modernization of the classic Yoshi's Island gameplay. It's kind of a similar vein like Kirby's Return Dreamland, where that game felt like a modern take on the classic Kirby gameplay. All of Yoshi's moveset return in this game, so you can run, jump, flare jump, make eggs, and such. But this time it has a very interesting twist with the yarn aesthetic. Like every time when Yoshi runs, you can see his legs turn to wheels, or every time he flare jumps, it turns into a propeller. And what I like about the yarn aesthetic is that it goes even beyond like simple presentation, because there's actual platforming that complements like the yarn theming. Like for example, technically Yoshi doesn't really make eggs in this game, but yarn balls. On surface level, they basically function the same thing as eggs, where it's basically a projectile for Yoshi to throw. But how they actually function is a bit different. For one, you don't really use it to attack enemies in this game, because every time you throw a yarn ball at an enemy, it'll just time them up for Yoshi to actually attack them. But more importantly, you use the yarn balls to interact with the environment. As throughout the levels, there's these special wireframes where every time Yoshi throws a yarn ball at it, it'll materialize in like a platform or a warp pipe for Yoshi to go through. Which is a really cool concept that takes full advantage of the yarn theming. And lastly, occasionally you'll be able to get these big yarn balls where if you throw it, it's able to hit about 3 targets instead of 1. Very useful, especially with the areas that requires you to throw yarn balls to add more platforms to the areas. And the best part too is that a lot of the Yoshi elements from the past games return to this one, but this time has a very interesting twist to complement the yarn theme as well. Like for example, one of the elements from Yoshi's Island is that Yoshi can roll these things called chomp rocks. They're extremely big, sturdy, and heavy. But jumping to Yoshi's Woolly World, they shook things up for a bit, where they practically function the exact same thing, but in this game, chain chomps are also enemies in this game, and they're made out of these wireframes, so every time Yoshi throws a yarn ball at them, they'll turn into chomp rocks, where you can roll them around and such. But Yoshi can also unravel the yarn to turn them back to normal, which leads to very interesting puzzles where the chain chomps will always chase after Yoshi, and they can jump around and such, which is a pretty good twist on an old concept for the past games. Although, speaking of which, when it comes to the past Yoshi's Island sequels, I really like those games, but they always have like this aura where they try too hard to recapture the magic of the original Super Nintendo game. But I feel like Yoshi's Woolly World does this very well in my opinion. As even though a majority of the classic Yoshi's Island elements are in this game, they are remixed and such to make them feel very fresh and new. Like transformations return in this game, but they work very differently from Yoshi's Island. Where for one, the transformation sections were seeped in within the actual levels, while in Woolly World they're designated to certain areas of the game. As in, for certain levels, there's these special doors Yoshi can go through, and when he does, he'll transform into a certain object. Some of them are pretty bizarre, like the very first one you go through is him transforming into a freaking umbrella. Now this is the stupid, goofy thing I love in Nintendo games, like, it's a freaking umbrella Yoshi. And other than that, we have Mega Yoshi, which allows Yoshi to turn gigantic, and I swear to God, I feel like this is one of the biggest legacy that this game left behind.
Whoshi! It's a double Yoshi!
Explosion! I think the only 2 transformations I didn't really care too much are probably the mole and plane ones, as the mole one feels a bit too slow paced for my taste, and I'm not really a big fan of auto-scrollers. Although the Bike Yoshi is definitely my favorite one, as it's pretty fun and very fast paced, especially if you're trying to get every collectible in this game. And that's doubly so for the Mermaid Yoshi, which has a pretty fun flow to it. Which, funniest thing is that if I had a nickel every time Goodfield turned a Mario character into a mermaid, I would have 2 nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that happened twice. Okay, so as for the actual levels in this game. So for the actual Yoshi platformer franchise itself, they always follow like a certain formula, as the entire platformer genre itself has like this certain spectrum to it. Where on one hand, you have the platformers that focuses on the obstacle courses themselves, basically trying to get to point A to point B with the skills that you learn along the way. But on the other hand, you have the platformers that focus a lot on the exploration and collectibles. I think the best example being stuff like Super Mario Odyssey and Donkey Kong Bonanza. As the actual difficulty and platforming challenges there are probably one of the easier games in the series, but despite that, they're still my favorite games on Nintendo Switch and Nintendo Switch 2. That is because even though the actual platformer challenge is pretty easy, it makes up for it by having very fun exploration. Especially in Donkey Kong Bonanza, where that game gives you an insane amount of freedom. And as for the Yoshi series, well, they definitely lean a lot more on the exploration aspect in platformers. I think the first Yoshi's Island game is the perfect middle ground of like challenging platforming and exploration, but in the later games, they always focus a lot more on the exploration aspect. And as for Yoshi's Woolly World, well, it kind of leans a lot more towards Yoshi's Island difficulty. It's still a bit easier than that game, but not to the point where it's just like a turn off your brain type of platformer, as the levels themselves have a pretty good difficulty curve with them, with the later levels in this game definitely upping up the challenge. And when you die, you go back to the nearest checkpoint. But just like in Yoshi's Island, if you really wanted to go for a much more harder difficulty, then trying to 100% Yoshi's Woolly World as in getting all the collectibles will definitely up the ante. As just like in games like Donkey Kong Country and Crash Bandicoot, I feel like the true challenge is to try to complete everything in a game. And as for the criteria for this one, well, it is very similar to Yoshi's Island, where for every level, there's an exact amount of collectibles you need to find in each of them. Since Baby Mario is not in this game, Yoshi has a regular health bar this time around, and instead of going up to 30, it can only go up to 20. But either way, the actual challenge is remotely the same because you have to go through the whole level without getting hit once. Which frankly is easier said than done, especially with the later parts of this game. But as for the actual collectibles, shockingly if you collect all of them, each of them will give you a certain reward. Like throughout the levels, there are about 5 different happy flowers that you can collect, and if you collect all of them in each of the world, you're able to unlock a special bonus level. This game doesn't have any red coins, but in its place they have stamp patches, which basically work exactly like red coins, where throughout the levels, they're well hidden within the beads, which of itself is basically a stand-in for the regular coins. Now as for the reward, if you collect enough stamp patches, then you'll unlock certain stamps that you can use for Miiverse. And considering the fact that Miiverse has been almost dead for a decade, wow, this is completely useless. And then finally we have the Wonder Wall. Now just like with the smiley flowers, there's about 5 of them in each level, so they can be devilishly hidden. And if you collect all of them, you get to restore Yoshi. Which, funniest thing back in the day, is that was my main priority, as I collect every single Wonder Wool I could find in each of the levels. It doesn't matter if I have to spend an hour in each of these levels, I am saving all those goddamn Yoshis. And I've gotta say, the best part of this game in my opinion is when you're trying to look for every single nook and cranny in this game. As each and every single level in this game is just brimming with different secrets and goodies within. And what I like is that a majority of all the secrets in this game aren't really that big. Like occasionally you'll find stuff like these special cushions where Yoshi can push that can draw in some secrets. There's these stray strings that Yoshi can slurp up like they're a bunch of spaghetti, which allows you to uncover some secret passages within. And if you're still having a hard time with this game, then you can always equip yourself with something called a power badge. Now with these, they'll give Yoshi a special boost in some aspects. Like the magnet badge will allow items to draw in towards Yoshi, or with this badge, which will give you a much more higher defense. And lastly, during your adventure, Yoshi's not going to be going in alone, as Kamek may have wiped out the entire Yoshi race, but at least Yoshi has one thing, one unstoppable thing that can basically kill God itself. Okay, so back in Yoshi's Island in some levels, you can find this special little dog named Poochie, who is an ally of Yoshi that you can ride on his back, although he was a bit of a pain in a level called Poochie Ain't Stupid. And after this game, he only made like a few minor appearances in stuff like Yoshi's Story and Yoshi's New Island. But I feel like starting with Yoshi's Woolly World, this is when Nintendo started really pushing Poochie, as he is freaking everywhere in this game's promotional stuff, and he's even on front of the box art and on the disc as well. And can you honestly really blame them? I mean, just look at Poochie. They made Poochie so unbelievably cute in this game. I especially love the little dance he does every time Yoshi gives him a collectible. And the best part too is that you can literally bring him in any level in this game. And yes, even the final one, which is pretty cool. And Poochie is very useful within these levels, as not only you can ride on him, but also he's a very nifty bodyguard for Yoshi because he's practically indestructible in this game. He can casually just swim through lava, he can't get crushed. If he falls into a bottomless pit, he can just jump right out. And he can literally take out any kind of enemy in this game. And I really gotta reiterate, he's freaking adorable. Which leads to the actual presentation of this game. And I must say, out of all the games that released on the Wii U, this honestly takes the case as probably the best looking game I've ever seen on the Wii U. Sure, you can make some of the arguments about some of the much more ambitious games like Breath of the Wild and such, but the unique art style that this game has really carries the presentation tenfold. It's frankly a very amazing natural evolution of what Kirby's Epic Yarn did back on the Wii. I just love how everything just looks very soft looking. Like when Yoshi travels across these various areas, I love how he's pressing down on the ground like everything is made out of like this cushion. And it's honestly very impressive how much they converted the entire library of Yoshi characters into yarn. And the music in this game is honestly one of the best in the Yoshi series. I don't think it tops Yoshi's Island per se, because that soundtrack in general is just so unbelievably iconic. But I really love how very upbeat and whimsical everything sounds in this game, with a big instrumental focus on stuff like pianos and guitars, which is kind of fitting considering the fact that guitars are string instruments. Now as for the additional side content, this game does have some pretty cool interesting things, like of course you have stuff like the sound box that allows you to play every music in this game. There's a museum that shows you every single enemy in this game very close up. And one of the cooler aspects of this game is that Yoshi's Roller World is fully supported with different types of amiibos. Where at the time, if you scan any kind of amiibo, you were able to unlock a certain skin for Yoshi. Like scanning the Mario amiibo will give you Mario Yoshi. It even works with different types of series like The Legend of Zelda where you can get Link Yoshi, as well as some third-party characters like Sonic the Hedgehog. And of course, I cannot talk about amiibos without mentioning the Yarn Yoshi ones, as Nintendo released 4 different types of amiibos, 3 of them being multicolored Yoshis, as well as this freaking monstrosity, which honestly takes the case as probably the biggest amiibo thing you can buy. Now, if you scan these, it'll just spawn in like an additional Yoshi for you. It's literally just like the Double Cherry from Super Mario 3D World. And oh yeah, I should also mention this also works for the regular Yoshi, as well as unlocking a brand new exclusive skin, which is just, Yoshi, I guess. And I've gotta say, without the yarn textures, Yoshi looks weirdly naked with this skin. And then finally we got the boss rush chain, which allows you to play through every boss in this game. Alright, there's bosses in this game, and yeah, they're okay. I do like the majority of like the main bosses in each of the worlds, as they feel very distinctive, and I like how they even have like cheeky nods from Yoshi's Island, where for the Piranha Plant boss fight, you can actually hit him with an egg, just like in the original. However, since the yarn boss doesn't kill the enemies, you still have to go through the boss, but I still think that was a very charming reference. The only ones I didn't really care about too much are just like the mid-bosses, just because the fact that there's literally only 2 of them, which is just fighting this giant Monty Mole, and as well as this obese Koopa. Now, they do kind of soften the blow real quick, because they aren't really like carbon copies, because every single boss with them are completely different. But at the same time, I feel like they could have done a better job on making some more unique bosses for the midpoints. Well, at the very least, the final boss in this game is pretty solid, even if it doesn't really reach the Yoshi's Island one. Because as soon as you clear through 5 of the worlds, Yoshi's able to storm through Bowser's area, which is literally in a drawer. But anyway, so as soon as you storm all the way up to the top of the drawer, Yoshi was able to infiltrate through Bowser's castle, where eventually he finds to Bowser's room. At this point, you probably get the idea. You fight Baby Bowser's in the first phase, you beat him, then Kamek goes, I'm gonna make him big. And so the true final boss begins, as Yoshi once again goes up against a giant Baby Bowser. And after draining all of Bowser's wool energy, all of the Yoshis that were captured by Kamek has been fully restored, concluding with Kamek and Bowser running off as Yoshis can live in peace once more. And yeah, that was Yoshi's Roller World, and 10 years later, it still holds up extremely well. Out of all the much more recent Yoshi games out there, this is definitely a very worthy successor to the original Yoshi's Island, as it takes everything what was great from that game and try to modernize it for a whole new generation. Which honestly is kind of a shame that at this point, there's not really a really easy way to actually get the game. As even still to this very day, despite so many different Wii U games coming over to Nintendo Switch, this is one of the few that has yet to get a re-release on the hybrid console. Although, not to say that they never re-released this game, because they actually did. As roughly a year later, we would get a 3DS port of this game. At this point, Nintendo was quite literally at their lowest point with the Wii U, which is kind of saying something because, well, 2016 was a freaking wasteland. And so, as an attempt to try to get their games on a much more successful console with the 3DS, Nintendo would have ported a couple of their Wii U games onto the 3DS, like Super Mario Maker, Captain Toad, and even Hyrule Warriors. And yes, Yoshi's World was one of them, as during a random 3DS Direct in 2016, Nintendo would announce Poochie and Yoshi's World. I haven't really played this game a lot, as every time I boot up Yoshi's World, I mostly just play on my Wii U. But man, if you still have a Nintendo 3DS, then I highly recommend trying out this version, because this is a shockingly good port of the game. Like, yeah, the graphics and such looks a little worse since we're jumping from the Wii U to the 3DS, but despite that, the actual art style for this game really helps the visuals, because even still, it looks pretty good for a 3DS game. And if you're playing it on a new 3DS system, it's able to run at a full smooth 60 FPS, which is pretty impressive. With the only actual downgrades being very minor in the grand scheme of things, like how the world map in this game is a simple 2D plane. So we quite literally went from 3D World's world map to 3D lands. And then finally, they also included a brand new side mode in this game called Poochie Dash, which is an auto-runner section as you play as Poochie as you try to get as much beads as you can. There's really not that much to say about these, they're very rudimentary, and it's kind of just like a simple pick-up-and-play kind of minigame. But I think one of the more interesting aspects is that they also included this brand new art mode, where you can draw and create the Yoshi of your dream. Personally, these things aren't really my thing, it kind of reminds me of like that DK art mode in Bonanza. But I still think this is a pretty cool addition, especially since this whole game is about arts and crafts, so why not give you a mode that allows you to do, well, art. But I think the coolest thing that this game includes is something called a Yoshi Theater, where here it includes a whopping 31 stop-motion shorts starring Yoshi and Poochie. And holy shit, this is probably one of the best things Nintendo has ever put out. Like, seriously though, just look at this. Honestly, if Nintendo ever does re-release Yoshi's World, they better have all these shorts in full HD, because that would be freaking amazing. But even if we never get a Nintendo Switch port of this game, I still think Yoshi's World is a game that you should really check out, especially if you're a big fan of Nintendo platformers. From the very fun and engaging level design, to the great art style, and even the stellar music, this is definitely going to be one of those Nintendo games that's really going to be warming your heart. But that'll do for today, so thank you for watching and I'll see you later. Bye-bye!